They told you you would become a goddess. They said you would go where the chieftain goes. You would live forever in that world, a better life than the one you have here. They said it was an honor. They asked all the female slaves who was willing. You stepped forward, you said, I am willing, and then you could never take it back. That was 10 days ago. Now it is the 10th day. You stand by the Volga River. You look at that boat. They are dragging it out of the river and onto the shore. The chieftain's body is inside, waiting for you. When you spoke those words 10 days ago, did you truly believe you would become a goddess? You can't say for sure now. You only know that today is the last day. No one recorded your name. An Arab traveler wrote all this down in the year 922, but he did not write your name. He simply called you the slave girl. What he wrote later became the most detailed account of a Viking funeral in human history. Historians and archaeologists around the world have studied it for 1,000 years. You are the protagonist of that record. Nameless. How did you end up here? No one knows where you were born. Perhaps in some small Slavic village, or perhaps from even farther away. The Vikings' slave trade spanned a vast territory, from the shores of the Baltic Sea to the Volga River basin, from the British Isles to the Byzantine Empire. Anyone from anywhere, if they were unlucky enough, could end up in a Viking chieftain's camp on the banks of the Volga. How old were you when you were bought? What work did you do? Did you have family? Did you suffer from the pain of a language barrier? None of this was recorded. By the time you appeared in those records, the chieftain was already dead. You had already stepped forward. Everything had already been decided. Before you came here, you may have had a home, parents, brothers and sisters, a village, a language, and a vision of the future. Not a grand one, perhaps, just marrying someone from the village, having children, tilling the land, and harvesting grain every autumn. That was all. Then, one day, outsiders arrived. They came quickly and left just as quickly. Your village changed after that. You were taken away with a group of people, bound with ropes or chains and loaded onto a ship, then another ship, then to another place, then displayed like merchandise, inspected by strangers, sold and brought here. What work you did here was not recorded. Perhaps you cooked, perhaps you cleaned, perhaps you wove, perhaps you learned a little of their language, perhaps you did not. How long you lived in this camp was not recorded. When you first met that chieftain was not recorded. Your only identity in those records is that when he died, you stepped forward and said you were willing to go with him. That question was asked on the very day the chieftain died. His family summoned all the female slaves, lined them up, and asked, "Which of you is willing to die with him?" No one spoke. Then you said, "I am willing." Was that decision your own? It is a question no one can answer. The Viking understanding of such voluntariness differs from that of modern people. You were a slave. You never truly possessed the right to choose. But in the moment that question was asked, you said you were willing. Those words came from your mouth. The traveler wrote a sentence in his account that later historians have debated ever since. He said she was willing, but he also wrote that once those words were spoken, there was no turning back. Even if she wanted to change her mind, she wouldn't have been allowed to. So just how willing were those words? Only you know. Why did you say that word? That question is even harder than was it voluntary? Perhaps you truly believed that story about the goddess. In that era and culture, many things were deemed sacred. People believed them and slaves believed them too. Perhaps you didn't believe it, but you wanted those 10 days. You wanted those 2 women to wash your feet. You wanted to be treated as someone important, even if only for 10 days. Perhaps you had lived too long and grown too weary. Perhaps you saw no way out in that camp. Perhaps, in your eyes, death was another way to leave. Maybe you were just the first one in that line to speak up, and then you couldn't stop. Your reason was your own. You took it with you. It wasn't recorded in those documents. The moment you uttered that word, your life changed instantly. You were placed in the care of 2 women who followed you everywhere. Their job was to ensure you suffered no discomfort for the remainder of your days. Sometimes they washed your feet, an act of the highest service in those times, one usually reserved for the lowest-ranking servants. Now, 2 women washed your feet because you were no longer an ordinary slave. You were about to die in the company of you had acquired a strange status, not that of a noble, yet closer to the divine than the common folk. For the next 10 days, you drank every day, you sang, they gave you fine food. The record states that you indulged in daily pleasures. This is the wording of that Arab. He was a Muslim. To him, the 10-day ritual was filled with what he considered indecent. He wrote obliquely, but what he meant was that during those 10 days, you were permitted to do whatever you wished, see whomever you wished, without any restrictions. This was part of the Viking ritual, to let you exhaust the last joy, singing for your master as you send him off to the next world. What were you thinking as you sang? The record doesn't tell us, but you sang every single day. The traveler said he asked the interpreter what you were singing. The interpreter told him you were saying goodbye. Goodbye to the people you knew. Goodbye to this world. You drank plenty of alcohol during those 10 days. Perhaps drinking made that matter feel a little further away. Perhaps drinking made you truly begin to believe that the place you were going was real. There is a detail in that record that mentions how, toward the end, you were already somewhat dazed after drinking. This daze was caused by the alcohol, or perhaps they had added something to it. No one told you. You just drank. Those were your final days. You spent those days singing, and your voice drifted along the banks of the Volga for 10 days. The 10th day arrived. They dragged the boat ashore from the river. They built a wooden frame to prop the boat up. They dug up the chieftain's body from where it had been buried for 10 days, dressed him in his finest clothes, gold thread and furs, and placed him back in the boat. They loaded the boat with food, weapons, and musical instruments. They killed his dog, cut it in half, and put it in the boat. They led 2 horses over and made them run until they were sweating, then chopped them up and placed them in the boat. They killed 2 cows, a rooster, and a hen, and put them all in the boat. The record states that all of this was done so that the chief would have food and supplies in the other world. Everything he needed had been prepared for him by his people. Then it was your turn. They brought you to the edge of the boat. You were to be lifted up. The men who had slept with the chief stood in a row, palms cupped so you could step on their hands, walking step by step onto the boat. This ritual had its meaning. As you stepped on these men's hands, they bore your weight and carried you up. Standing on the hands they held aloft, your eyes could see far into the distance, rising above everyone standing on the ground. The traveler recorded this scene. He wrote that you were lifted up and you looked into the distance. Someone held up a doorframe before you, just a doorframe, no door. They asked you, "What do you see?" You said, "I see my father and mother." Then they turned the doorframe the other way and asked again, "What do you see?" You said, "I see my deceased master. He is sitting there. It is green and beautiful. His men are by his side. He is calling me." In that account, these were your final words. Was what you saw real? Was it the 10 days of drinking that made you see it? Was it the ritual? Did you truly believe in the place you were going? No one knows. You stepped onto the boat, treading on those hands. There was a tent on the boat. The chief's body lay inside. You were to go in. They gave you a cup of wine. You drank it. You sang a song. The traveler's interpreter told him you were singing a farewell to your companions. Then they gave you another cup of wine. You drank it. You stood at the entrance to the tent. You wanted to go in. You looked up. You did not go in. You stood there, your head resting between the tent and the boat. You stood there for a moment. The account pauses here. The words the traveler used were, "She hesitated." She wanted to go in but couldn't. Those were the heaviest words in that 1,000-year-old record. She hesitated. No one knows what you were thinking in that moment as you stood at the entrance. Perhaps you thought of the village, of a certain morning before you were taken away, of a certain face. Perhaps you weren't thinking of anything at all, just standing there, the wine weighing heavily on your mind, the boat beneath your feet unsteady, the darkness inside the tent deep. Perhaps in that moment, standing there, you truly sensed for the first time what was about to happen, not the version the ritual had told you, but the real Oni version. Then, the old woman known as the Angel of Death walked over. She was the presider of the entire ceremony. She was in charge of arranging everything. She pushed your head into the tent. The men outside began striking their shields with sticks, loudly. The sound of shields being struck echoed along the banks of the Volga. The traveler asked the interpreter why they did this. The interpreter said it was to prevent the other female slaves from hearing the sounds inside, so they wouldn't flee out of fear. It was also to keep the outside world from hearing what was happening inside. No matter what transpired within, the outside world didn't need to know. You never came out of the tent again. They set the ship ablaze. The traveler stood on the shore watching the fire. Then, a sudden gust of wind blew in, and the flames shot up into the sky. The entire ship burned to ashes in a very short time. A Viking standing beside him spoke to him with a smile. The interpreter told him what the man said. "You Arabs are truly foolish. You bury your loved ones in the ground, letting the earth and worms devour them. We send them off with fire. They go straight to paradise." As soon as he finished speaking, a strong wind came and the ship burned in the gale. The Viking laughed and said, "See, his master loved him and sent this wind to take him away quickly." The traveler wrote all of this down in his book. What he wrote 1,000 years ago can still be read today. He was a devout Muslim. He considered everything he witnessed with his own eyes to be barbaric and completely at odds with his faith, yet he recorded it all very carefully, in great detail, including your ashes were mixed with the chieftains and scattered by the wind along the banks of the Volga. They built a mound where the boat had originally been moored. On top of the mound, they erected a wooden pillar engraved with the chieftain's name and the name of their king. Then, everyone left. Your name was not on the wooden pillar, nor was it in that record, but your voice was in that record. You said you saw your father and mother. You said you saw your master. He was calling you. You drank that cup of wine. You sang that song. You stood at that doorway. You hesitated for a moment, and then you went inside. You told those men what you saw on the other side. You let that Arab hear the song you sang. You live on in that record, nameless but alive. You have lived for over 1,000 years, longer than that Viking chieftain, longer than that ship, longer than that wooden pillar by the Volga that bears the names of everyone but yours. Did you really see that beautiful green place? Did you truly believe you had been there? For over 1,000 years, no one has been able to answer that question for you. Perhaps those 10 days of drinking and that ritual allowed you to truly see something. Perhaps you were simply fulfilling what you had to do. Perhaps, after doing all of this, you discovered it wasn't what you had imagined. Only you know, and you left no answer behind. That traveler, Ibn Fadlan, returned to his homeland. He wrote down everything he had seen in a book. That book was called Al-Risala, which means report in Arabic. He included you in that report, not by name, but simply as the slave girl. The report was lost for centuries, with fragments surviving in medieval libraries. In 1923, a Russian Orientalist discovered an almost complete manuscript in a library. Since then, this 1,000-year-old record has been extensively studied and translated. Today, you can read it in many languages. In 1999, a Hollywood film titled The 13th Warrior brought Ibn Fadlan's story to the big screen. The movie features Vikings, battles, and adventures, but not you. Your part didn't make it into the film. The movie didn't need your part. What it needed were battles and heroes, not a woman standing at the entrance of a tent, hesitating. But that hesitation remained in the record. It has been there for over 1,000 years. Everyone who studies that period of history must confront those few words. She hesitated. She wanted to go in, but couldn't. Then she was pushed inside. These are the most honest words in the entire account. Historians debate the veracity of many other things the traveler recorded, but no one questions those few words because they are too real, so real that they don't seem to have been fabricated to please others. Those words are the only thing she left behind. You have no name, you have no homeland, you left behind no language, you left behind only that one moment of hesitation. Yet that hesitation has outlived the ship, outlived the wooden pillars standing on the mound, and outlived the traveler who wrote all this down. You have stood at that doorway for over 1,000 years and have not left. You spoke that word, you drank that cup of wine, you sang that song, you stood at that doorway and hesitated for a moment, and then you went inside. That was your life, shorter than most people's. Yet that single moment of hesitation has been witnessed by more people than most lives are. This is not the kind of immortality you wanted, but it is what you received.